A judge has ruled in Northern Township's favor in an annexation dispute with the city of Bemidji.
Right now, one of the biggest local government fights in our area just came to an end because the city of Bemidji tried to annex part of Northern Township. Northern Township fought back, and now instead of being absorbed into Bemidji, Northern Township is becoming a brand new city. It will be called Northern Minnesota. And if you own a property around Lake Bemidji, this actually matters a lot more than you think, because for some homeowners, this decision may have saved them thousands of dollars a year in property taxes. Let me explain what happened. My name is Tyler and I'm a real estate agent right here in Bemidji, and I pay close attention to the things that actually affect the local housing market. And this story is one of the more interesting local stories that I've seen in a while, because we have a township taking on a city in court. We have a proposed annexation around Lake Bemidji. We have a $19 million wastewater project. And we have lakeshore homeowners who were looking at a pretty massive tax increase if this had gone the other way. Okay, first we need to talk about what Northern Township actually is, because if you've ever driven north or northeast of Bemidji, you've probably been through it. Northern Township wraps around a big part of Lake Bemidji, including a large stretch of the lakeshore. And depending on which numbers you look at, it has somewhere around 3,800 to 4,500 people. And up until now, Northern has been a township, not a city. That difference matters because a township is usually a simpler form of local government with fewer services, fewer departments, fewer rules, and in many cases, lower taxes. A city usually has more structure, more services, more staff, more rules, and usually higher taxes to help pay for all of it. For a long time, Northern Township has basically been the smaller government neighbor sitting right next to Bemidji, and for decades, that setup worked. But then Bemidji started looking at expanding its borders. That process is called annexation, which is when a city brings land from outside the city limits into the city limits. When that happens, the people who live in that area usually start paying city taxes, they follow city rules, and they may get access to city services. Now, Bemidji did have a good reason for wanting to expand into this area, and it's because there has been concern for a long time about septic systems around Lake Bemidji. A lot of homes around the lake are on private septic systems, which is very normal for our area. But as those systems age, there can be concerns about leaks, failures, and long-term health of the lake. So when a resort on the lake had septic issues and wanted to connect to Bemidji's city sewer system, Bemidji basically said, sure, we can do that, but only if you become a part of the city. That is where things started to get messy, because this was not just about one property. Bemidji was looking to annex a much larger area, including around 120 lakeshore parcels, and these were not just some random parcels either. These were some of the most valuable properties in Northern Township. And in fact, the area Bemidji wanted to annex represented roughly 30% of Northern Township's entire tax base. And that's a big deal, because if Northern Township lost that much of its tax base, the remaining residents would likely have to make up the difference in some way. And on the other side, the homeowners who got annexed into Bemidji would have to start paying Bemidji city taxes. That brings us to the part that really matters for homeowners, which is the tax difference. Without getting too deep into how Minnesota property taxes work, the simple version is this. The local tax burden in Bemidji is much higher than it's been in Northern Township. And if those lake properties had been pulled into Bemidji, their tax bills would have gone up, and not by a tiny amount either. The judge in this case looked at a lake home valued at about $546,000, and while that home was in Northern Township, the city or township portion of the tax bill was around $836 per year. And if that same property had been annexed into Bemidji, that number would have jumped to about $2,809 per year. That's almost $2,000 more per year for the same house, same location, same lake, same property, just a different local government. And that is why this became such a big deal, because for a normal homeowner, an extra $2,000 per year is not nothing. And for some of the larger properties, that difference was even bigger. Rutgers, the resort on the lake, was looking at more than $20,000 per year in extra taxes if it had been annexed. So Northern Township had a choice to make. They could try to negotiate, they could risk losing a part of their tax base, or they could make a much bigger move. And that's what they did. Northern Township filed what's called a notice of intent to incorporate, which is the legal way of saying, we want to become our own city. If Northern becomes its own city, then Bemidji would not be able to annex that land in the same way. A week later, Bemidji responded with its own annexation petition, and that's how we ended up in court. This turned into a 2-week boundary trial between Northern Township and the city of Bemidji. Hundreds of people showed up, and there were more than 700 written comments. And on February 10th, 2026, Chief Administrative Law Judge Jessica Palmer Denig issued a 70-page ruling. She approved Northern Township's incorporation, and she denied Bemidji's request for annexation. Bemidji tried to appeal that decision in March, but that appeal was denied, and now this is moving forward. Northern Township is becoming the city of Northern. Now let's talk about the timeline because this part can get confusing. Northern does not officially become a city right away. The election happens on November 3rd, 2026, and this is when voters in Northern Township will elect their first mayor and 4 city council members. Then in January of 2027, those new officials will be sworn in, and when that happens, Northern Township will officially dissolve and become the city of Northern. So starting in 2027, Beltrami County will have a brand new city. Now the zip code will stay the same, mail will still go through Bemidji, and if you live in northern Minnesota, you may still be able to use Bemidji on your mailing address. But legally, on paper, you will live in northern Minnesota. Now this is the big question. What does this actually mean for homeowners? If you currently live in Northern Township, the message from the township leadership has been that taxes are not expected to jump just because the name changes from township to city. They are not planning to suddenly create a giant new staff. They're not planning to build out a bunch of brand new departments overnight. And becoming a city also opens the door to local government aid. That is state money that cities can qualify for, but townships generally cannot. And that money could help offset some of the cost of running a new city. But I want to be really honest here. I would not assume that taxes will stay exactly the same forever. I do think taxes could go up over time, not necessarily in some crazy dramatic way, but cities generally cost more to operate than townships do. There are more requirements, more reporting, more decisions to make, and eventually there'll be a brand new mayor and city council setting the budget. That's the big unknown right now because the people who actually will be making the decisions have not been elected yet. So if you live in Northern Township, I would not panic, but I also would not build your entire financial future around taxes staying exactly where they are forever, which, let's be honest, they never do anyway. There could be some movement over the next few years, but compared to what could have happened under the annexation, this is still a much different situation. But there's still one cost that some homeowners need to be aware of. Northern Township is moving forward with its own wastewater treatment project. The total project is expected to cost around $19 million. They have already lined up about $6 million in federal grants, and the rest of the cost is expected to be paid by the properties that connect to the system. The current estimate is around $14,000 per home, but that would spread out over 15 to 20 years. So instead of writing one giant check, it would be closer to about $55 a month for the homes that hook up. That is still a real cost, but it is very different than being annexed into Bemidji and paying a much higher tax rate every single year. And this does not apply to every single property in Northern either. It applies to the homes in the sewer project area that connect to the system. So if you're not in that zone, that fee may not affect you. So to wrap this up, here's the simple version. Bemidji wanted to annex part of Northern Township. Northern Township fought back by trying to become its own city. A judge sided with Northern Township. Bemidji's appeal was denied, and now in 2027, Northern Township will officially become the city of Northern. And for the local housing market, I think this makes Northern an even more interesting area to watch over the next few years. It keeps the area separate from Bemidji, it gives residents more local control, and it may help preserve one of the biggest selling points Northern has had for a long time, which is lower taxes compared to the city. Now, I'm curious what you think. Was Northern right to fight this? Should Bemidji have been allowed to annex that area? Or do you think becoming a new city is going to create its own set of problems? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more local real estate and housing market updates just like this, be sure you get subscribed to the channel. This has been Tyler Montgomery with Team Montgomery and 218 Real Estate, and I'll see you in the next one.